Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Newport Historical Society. I'm Ruth Taylor. I guess the first thing I want to say to you all is, next time, RSVP. We have 30 people on the list for tonight. Tonight is obviously a very exciting event for us and for all of you, and you're voting with your feet by being here, and thank you for doing that. I do want to say something to put tonight's announcement and the events of this week into a little context in Newport's history. I want to say that since joining the staff of the Newport Historical Society about 11 years ago, I have learned a lot about Newport's history. But one of the things I've also learned is that we tell the same stories over and over again. In our devotion to Newport's history, we are almost in an echo chamber. We tell the same stories over and over again, and we relish them, and at the same time that we're doing that, we're ignoring a great deal that can still be learned and told about this history, and some of it is right beneath our feet. The less told stories of Newport's history include the stories of people of African descent, free and enslaved, 17th through 21st centuries, the stories of women and women in commerce and achievement, Native Americans who were actually supposed to vacate the island when European settlers arrived. It was part of the deal, but they didn't. And they participated in the economy here by choice and by force. It includes stories of technological advances. Did you all know that our collections include an electrical generating machine just like Ben Franklin's, just exactly the same? And also one of the first chronometers used to find longitude at sea, right here. And this week we learned that Newport also, like several or perhaps many early New England cities, had what can be described as an aqueduct system. Histories can only be constructed and told based on good information. And we are very lucky to be in the position of getting great information this week on the Newport Spring Site. And in Newport's twin traditions of being both locally focused and internationally connected, we are getting that information from investigators from RISD and Salve Regina University, from a local technology company, and also from two very talented urban speleologists from Rome. Before they present their work and their tentative findings to you tonight, it is important for me to put this in context as well. This work just literally happened this week. What we'll see today are the methods that were used to examine an archaeological feature such as the spring site and some tentative findings from that investigation. A great deal of analysis and research now must follow. So please stay in touch with the Newport Historical Society and with the Spring Site Leadership Committee. As this work goes forward, it will be publicized. So I'd like to introduce now from Roma Sotteranea, I'm going to forget your last name, Adriana Morito, who will begin to talk about the work of Roma Sotteranea tonight.
So, good evening. I'm impressed. Let me say that together with Michele Concas, my fellow friend and partner in this adventure, we've been really honored to be part of this exceptional adventure and of all the team. First of all, thanks to the host of this event, Ruth Taylor and her Newport Historical Society. We are obviously thankful to Historic Newport Spring Committee with Lily Dick, who also welcomed us in her beautiful mansion and made us feel at home. Thanks to Steve Ostergaard and his staff for the professional technical assistance on site. Yep. And we are grateful to John Marcoux of South Virginia University for looking into the mud for any kind of relevant finds. And thanks also to Howard Newman, a great Rome lover. And obviously, last but not least, we want to thank Nick DePace, our friend who was the connection between the two continents and involved us in this unbelievable and, let me say, unexpected experience. Just a few words about Roma Sotteranea to let you understand what we do on the other side of the world. Roma Sotteranea is a non-profit association founded in the year 2000, and we always operate in collaboration with the Ministry of Culture, with Rome municipality and other governmental and regional structures. Our activity concentrates in and around Rome and focuses mainly on archaeological and historic evidence, our greatest heritage. Archaeological and historic evidence that must be protected in the discovery phases, and most of all, must be maintained and preserved in the years to come. We are basically the longa manus in Latin, the long hand, the long arm of the archaeologists, trying to be their eyes and bringing to the surface the biggest amount of information. And this happens through explorations, sometimes quite difficult, and I would like to show you now a little video about that. So we had to go down in this shaft that was made on purpose for us for more than 25 meters, so it means 70 feet, more or less, 80 feet, 80 feet. And there was basically there was a hollow space that was seen by doing some surveys from the top. And obviously, they wanted to know what was lying behind before destroying maybe everything. And basically, what we found were tough mines. So something that was used for probably hundreds of years, with a lot of remains inside, and huge. I mean, there are kind of little lakes you can see. There are as well structures that were created to when the buildings were built on top in order not to have everything collapsing. And we had to go through whole mapping that took basically weeks. This is one of the big chambers we found. So the place is still there, and we were not able yet, after 4 years, to kind of trying to open it to the public or doing something, because there are a lot of bureaucratic problems. But we hope one day that maybe it will be visible to everyone. Okay, going back to the venue. So, after this kind of difficult exploration, we... Is it there?
No, it's not the line.
Yeah, it's the person way.
There you go.
So, sometimes we do this exploration with the aid of instruments like robots if requested, and sometimes we dig, and obviously the digging brings up artifacts that have to be cleaned. We screen for them in the mud, in the soil, and then at the end we catalog them. And obviously we take pictures and videos, and sometimes these pictures are really very nice, but it's very difficult to take pictures like these. I mean, at the end of this set, let's put it that way, this was the conditions we were coming out from. So it was muddy and it was wet, and you can understand how it's difficult when you have a lot of photographic instruments and machines that cost a lot of money. So, and we do drawings of some particular features, and sometimes we map as well by hand, and we realize maps as well with the laser scanner or with the total station, and we verify afterwards the on-site work done. If there is any mistake or whatever, we work all the data on AutoCAD, and we do, quite of extensive mapping sometimes, like this one for example. And these are tennis courts, just to give you the idea. These are all tennis courts. And then at the end, we present kind of final results that are put together and synthesized to be given to the institutions. And because we do believe that the research, the study, and the preservation of archaeological and historic sites is an indispensable moment of every development that is taking place in a city with a past. It doesn't matter if the past is 3,000 years or 200 or 300 years old. So, for us, the past is a legacy that we do not have the right to waste, to cancel, or to destroy for our generation and for the generations to come. In conclusion, after 18 years of activity, one of our mottos is that Rome's future cannot be built without meeting Rome's past. And maybe the same could become Newport's future cannot be built without meeting Newport's past. So, thank you very much, and I think that now Nick will continue with the presentation.
So just to give some context, I'm Italian-American, so I have the great fortune of working in Rhode Island as an architect and as an instructor at the Rhode Island School of Design. And I have the hobby of being an urban spelunker with these guys, with the interest in the documentation of archaeology. So not only am I working underground, but I'm also interested in working with archaeologists above ground and helping them or assisting them in particular locations that they might not be able to get to themselves. So archaeology is, or can be, somewhat of a destructive process. Layers of information are removed, right? And it's hard to bring them back, right? This is a way of gaining knowledge. We remove things, we understand how time placed these layers, and it's of course hard to get back. The great thing about urban speleology, particularly in the context of a place like Rome, is that once a void or an empty space is identified and accessible, we can begin to learn about the history without destroying it. So it's a great challenge because sometimes it is easier, to cut. It's like the old adage: it's to measure a tree than to cut it, right? but when you cut the tree, you kill it, right? So we're finding ourselves in a situation, even in the site that we looked at in the last 2 days, where we have an incredibly intact structure that hasn't changed too much and since it was probably built. So the slide that you see in front of you is actually a continuation of the last image, which showed an individual in a quarry looking at this this lake that is formed. And where we are is we're really close to the Colosseum, and we're actually underneath the podium of the Temple to the Divine Claudius. So this is all happening in the center of the city. And we have data or information from Rodolfo Lanciani, who frantically tried to map Rome after the unification of Italy. Because after the unification of Italy, Rome became a capital again, and there was a frenzy of new construction. So working in the dark was not as easy as working with broad daylight, so it was very hard to capture the dimensions and the spaces and the qualities of the subterranean spaces. So what you're seeing on the left is Lanciani's documentation of a quarry, and what you're seeing on the right is our documentation of the quarry. And this is the first project that I collaborated with Adriano and Michele and the rest of Roma Sotteranea after I completed a Fulbright grant in Rome in 2004-2005, really to study subterranean archaeology in reference to an artist and architect of the 18th century named Piranesi. Maybe some of you might have heard Giambattista Piranesi. I'm sure if you go to the Rhode Library, there's another time. So I was really interested in using his documentation and his interest in subterranean archaeology to try to locate and pinpoint some of the things that we were discovering in 2004, 2005, 2006 with the things that he was documenting at his time. And there was a lot of sort of wonderful occasions, like noticing the entry point into a quarry. Although he wasn't brave enough to go in there and document it, he did document the fact that after they built the podium for the Temple of the Divine Claudius, they also recognized in the Middle Ages that there was a great resource under there, volcanic sand, and they began to dig. All right? So this is exciting to me because it begins to contextualize not only the industry of spelunking in time, but also this kind of, this knowledge that even things that are happening underneath great architecture and archaeology can be just as fascinating. So another, this was actually the project that won me this Fulbright. It was the documentation of a gatehouse for a subterranean water conduit for the crater lake of the Alban Hills, so Lake Albanus. This is right next to the Pope's summer home. And the story says is that this was excavated sometime in 398 BCE. The gatehouse, we don't know exactly when it was built, but we do know that it was probably built sometime after that, sometime either in the late Republic or early Empire. And the first photos that you see to the left is my first visit there in 1996, where the structure is still working. Water is coming in into this gatehouse from a lake, so like a bathtub overflow drain. The water goes underneath the crater, the mountain of the crater, and then 2 kilometers later it falls out on the other side towards the hills, towards the fields in Rome. And then later on, in 2006, I was invited back to study it, and that's me on the right, looking into the conduit. So we have Piranesi's documentation. My photogrammetry on the bottom is trying to piece together the elevations to see how much has changed since the time of Piranesi. Because of a cleaning that occurred at the time that I was there, I was able to draw and measure areas that Piranesi could not have seen. Right? So it's new documentation on top of Piranesi's documentation. And this information right now has already been covered up. So I was there, fortunately, at a time after a cleanup, and I was there to measure and draw the architecture. Right now, the building, the material is still there, but because of siltation and the growth of some weeds, it's no longer accessible. Using Piranesi's plan documentation, I went in there with the total station and we did a modern measurement of the plan. So now we have a plan of comparison to that of Piranesi, which allows us to see not only what has changed since the time of Piranesi, this is 1760, but also whether his documentation was any good. And then further on, after a great degree of study,
Could you explain maybe what a total station is to it?
so this is a measurement device that will locate points from a series of station points. So we locate ourselves at a particular point, and we take measurements at particular angles, right? So it basically locks in points in X, Y, and Z world.
Plain table surveying.
Thanks, bud. So then later on, after this level of study, becomes a moment of speculation, right? How did this thing come about? Did it go through different stages of construction, right? Did it look differently in the past than it does now? More recently, this is called Villa Manya. This is south of Rome, about 40 kilometers south of Rome. What we discovered, this is an excavation that took over 4 or 5 years. I was involved in at least 2 or 3 of them. And the question was, from a story of Marcus Aurelius writing to his teacher, Frontis, about a rustic or villa rustico, where you would grow crops. And in this particular location, what was the imperial vintages, where the emperor brewed his own wine. So there was a story that had been documented, that's part of the written record, and the excavation was intended to try to prove that right. And I worked with about 30 or 40 archaeologists over a 2-year period. And here's the excavation. So this is in front of this church, which wasn't always a church, it was once another structure. But the question was, could this be documented in a way so we could learn more about the phases of construction by taking very good care in drawing the facade. So this is me sitting in front of the building, drawing it by hand, because photos were done and people were trying to understand the phasing through photogrammetry. But because photogrammetry is basically taking photos and then drawing on top of a photograph, you're not actually there to witness, the thing itself, right? So I spent a couple hours in front of it to try to draw every single stone, brick, piece of mortar. And it allowed us, after a lot of study, to think about phasing of construction. So these drawings are speculative, but they are based off of this sort of extremely tedious and empirical drawing. Later on, there's a discovery of a water system, a cloister, and although it was filled in with debris, we found places where we could begin to extract information. So that's me pushing my arm in to see as far as I could get into the cistern, because the cistern was no longer accessible. And then again, another speculation through some of the other material on the dig, and locating this cistern with these 4 corners of the cloister in mind. I was able to draw up some kind of conclusions. Again, and then lastly for this Villa Manya, while I was on site, whenever something was discovered that they did not want to excavate, but felt that there was enough space for me to go through, I would evaluate it for security and safety, and then I would start my walk through it. So this is a very, very typical feature that you see all over Roman construction. Conduit with a cappuccino cap, okay? Condotto a cappuccino, which we discovered was initially used for a drainage conduit, but then in the Middle Ages was used as an oven. Okay, so what's going on here is everyone's waiting for me to come out to see if there's evidence of burn marks and any sort of production that might be concurrent or similar to the baking of bread. Okay. And then later on, more and more study, more speculations as to how this thing might have looked. Coffee's gas station. And this is what brings me to Newport. There are other reasons that I'm at Newport. I have a lot of wonderful friends and collaborators from past projects like Photo over there. But I was brought in by the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities and their program of catalyzing Newport. I think it was really amazing. And the catalyst had proposed a futurist vision of the city in 2061. So it was 2016, and he just switched to the 1 and 6. And he said, well, what will happen to Newport in 2061? What will be the form of governance? Where will the mayor's office be? And sort of in jest, we decided it should be at Coffee's, because that's where the city began. So it might be the place where the city ends. So my interest in it was the fact that this place could identify water's past and water's future at the same place. So my speculation on this was, if we take the racing stripe, or the red stripe that wraps around Coffee's garage, and we call that a datum, we might be able to measure everything from it. So the game was, what if sea level rise? What if storm surge was ever to arrive at Coffee's garage? And this red line could be an indicator of what is dry and what is wet in regards to the spring. So the idea of the spring was that water was coming into Coffee's garage through the mechanical pit, through the service pit. I started to look at examples of hydrometers, which are very common in places like Rome that have flooding issues, nilometers in ancient Egypt, and I juxtaposed that idea with Coffee, and you can see the colony house. Again, this is sort of a speculation in a game, but we all know that Newport is something that Newport will have to be thinking about very soon. So a planimetric contour view of potential flooded areas. Again, this is all serious, but this is sort of a jest. This is not science yet. And a construction that takes into account the red line as a place that is a datum to be measured from. This is the 34-foot above mean sea level. Whereas things that needed to be saved would be placed above. And in this case, we had some of the school children in Newport build terrariums and containing the things that they wanted to keep. And everything below would be flooded. Now we get to the site as we know it from discovery. This is I don't know if Eric is here.
Yeah. There he is.
Okay. So Eric, this is something you just sent. And I said, wow, this is such an important document. This is the discovery. This is where we find this thing again. We don't know the last time someone has identified or recognized the actual spring itself, but this is the moment where now in today's history, we know that there's something there, there's a water feature. And the second image is of me coming to inspect it. And the reason for the inspection is to see if there was a chance or a probability of us actually going in there. So my first investigation was, is this safe enough for people to go in there with our training? I deemed it was safe enough, and that's where this investigation started, and that's where I called Roma Sotteranea. So, oh no! Sorry.
You see the map.
So it's just a screen that says video on it?
Yeah.
Just a second. Do you see something?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, here we go. So the last image was the investigation, and here's the first descent.
Controlli quanto è l'acqua, vedi se puoi spostare la pompa, vedi com'è la situazione. Ok. Okay. Right. Hopefully copper. Yeah, that would make sense. Okay, listen, that's great. Now, right on that place you just worked with. It'll go, the scraper. It'll go right through the outside. See that? It's reflecting, the light is reflecting. It looks like copper. You make a louder number. Yes. You see that? Yeah, right. Yeah, that's how they make the copper. Yeah, it's better. No, it's coming on the side. It's shiny gold.
It's up there. Notebook's a little dirty there.
Great. Okay. Notebook is dirty because we still have a lot of material that we're just trying to synthesize, right? So this is a very unusual moment where we usually will spend some weeks, months, maybe years trying to put this together before it's even presented to the public. So I just want to sort of continue to make it clear that it's very unusual for us to present so much material to the public. It's exciting, and anything we're going to be showing to you is still, it's still preliminary. Some of the ideas or hypotheses is, this is something that we have to be willing to think through and maybe even down our initial thoughts. But my notes occur above ground and below ground. So what I tried to do just in the last 12 hours is think through the design or the project of the spring that we're seeing and ask the question, is there anything in the world that this resembles? And what I'm finding is a type of technology that's pretty common to springs, which is called a spring box. You might have heard of spring houses. Spring box is a way to contain and control and concentrate and aerate and protect the resource. Because immediately after Newport is inhabited by the Europeans and Spring Street becomes a major thoroughfare, what's the worst thing that could happen to your water source? Right? So it makes sense that they would have tried to keep this stuff safe, especially if they're drinking it. If they weren't drinking it, maybe they wouldn't worry as much about it. But it looks like this type of structure that's trying to protect this important resource. So we're going to call it a spring box, or at least that's my working hypothesis, that it's a spring box. We know generally where the direction of the water is coming from, right? Around Barney Street, where we are right now, water is moving downward. We're seeing evidence of water bubbling between the current water level, which again has been, as Lily mentioned, we've removed a lot of water. When we first looked at a spring, the water was very, very close to the ceiling, completely full of water. So So we see evidence of the water cycle. So the hydrological process that's still happening. This isn't a dead thing. It's still alive. Some of the other evidence I thought was fascinating, you might remember it from the video, was a big window. Okay? What it appears to be, and we did notice this in the first inspection, is that there looked like there was water coming down, like a sandy shelf, sandy slope. And if we look at the example next to it, we're calling it a lead-in pipe. The idea of water kind of being controlled from a particular point. You have gravels that are bringing the water down into a pipe. And in the case of where we are right now, there's good reason to believe that there could be a form of water conveyance, gravity-fed, that's coming from beyond Spring Street. So that's a working theory, that maybe there is a kind of gallery or tunnel that's being made to bring water from across the street. Okay? And then the other feature that we saw, which was very evident in the video, is an idea of capturing that water under pressure at a certain height. So it's not really low to the ground, it's not super high. And with the spring box, we might be looking for a couple of different elements. One of them is the overflow. Didn't see an overflow. One of them would be a place or a pipe that would bring water to storage or to some place outside of the box, which I'm identifying as this feature here in the middle, which you saw in the video as being kind of bulb that looked like it was this deteriorating iron. And then beneath that level, about a foot or so, on another part of the cistern, we have a pipe that's made of wood with its plug that's still in there. So we might want to think about the overflow that we haven't seen, the supply pipe or the supply line, which is controllable from gate valve, what we've identified as a gate valve. So open and close and control the amount of water moving from this location to somewhere else. And then we have a wooden structure, a wooden pipe with a plug, which of course has no variability. It's one thing or another. It's either closed or it's open. So that could potentially be a clean out. We don't know. It could be also another way of supplying water. We don't know. Okay. Then of course we have the point of entry from above, which is directly above this gate valve. Directly above it, as if someone could monitor or observe or have some kind of instrument to turn that valve, to turn that gate. Okay, so maybe people aren't going down there all the time to turn a faucet. They're actually, there's some kind of implement that allows them to vary the flow of water. Okay, so these are, this again is hypothesis. So we were concerned, or we were wondering about this material on the shelf and wondered if the slope of, let's say, the structure was at the same angle, and it wasn't. We excavated into it to discover that there is a stone shelf there that is slightly inclined. It's not flat, and it's certainly not bent the other way. It's slightly inclined towards this spring box. Next to this sort of rusted pipe, we identified another pipe, potentially made of lead, relatively small diameter, that is coming out from the bottom of the cistern. And what you're seeing right now on the drawing, on the photo on the right, it's filled with this debris that fell into the spring at some point, and now it's bending without a separate elbow connection. It's a bent pipe, but it's not a damaged bent pipe. It hasn't been smashed. It was intentionally bent to draw water out from that location. This coincides, I believe, with a ground-penetrating radar that John discovered 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. Okay. And this is important because now the people in the team are starting to see the same things. So I think you said 3 to 4 feet.
Yeah,
Right.
I'll show it, yeah.
Exactly. So this is great. We're seeing the same things. So we have this iron pipe. This is leading towards the courthouse. Some sort of attachment. And there's that attachment again. And then we have something that could be like a bonnet that has a hinge. So it can be open and closed. And we've identified that as being iron. On top of that, the actual valve, we've identified that with the help of Howard from great distance as brass. In front of that is a filter, a colander. You can see from both views that what it's meant to do is to filter heavy sediments out and bring water in, right? So it's a filtering device. Some examples of the stonework. So some of it might be looked at as rubble of various types of stone. We have slate, but we're also getting nicely cut granite, particularly in the features that matter, like the window that I was telling you about. So there's a nicely cut edge there against that window. We've also noticed that the shape of this is a bit like a D. So we have what appears to be a straight wall that is parallel to spring, and then we have this rounded or curved wall that goes downhill. And my first understanding would be that the retaining wall might have been built first, but on further observation, we noticed that this curvilinear wall was actually built first because the straight wall is butting into it. Okay, so it's not a clean joint; it's one is butting into the other. On the ceiling, we're seeing pretty large and thick slabs of slate, very similar to the sidewalk slate you would see today. Okay, and we're also getting some evidence of splitting. So there's, if you look at that line right there, that's the line that the slate was supposed to be split at. But when they cut it, it split a little off, and they put it in anyways. Okay, but these are things. It's a miracle that sometimes it takes about 10 years to notice these things. But Adriana picked it up, I think, after your second or third descent. So these are things that we're just trying to hold for the record. There's the well, which the well opening or the well cover, which is about 16 or 18 inches wide. And then as we're looking in the direction towards Coffey's entry, we see where the collapse was. And what we're getting from some of the dimensions is that it may have been a symmetrical design. That was like about the D, right? Although a portion of the structure has been sort of destroyed, we seem to understand that the design might have been symmetrical about the well opening and that pipe.
And Nick, it may be destroyed or it may just be covered up, is that right?
There's definitely evidence of stones being turned over, and some of the roof structure has collapsed to the next course. Okay. And then we have evidence of this amazing log in its plug, approximately 10 to 11 inches in diameter. And we're just getting information now about the stories that might be behind this. And this is what's so exciting, is in the last 12 hours, we're getting all this new information. So this is sometimes what happens. We start to see images, we get excited, and then people's brains start to say, wait a minute, I think I read something about this. Or I'm pretty sure I have something like this in my basement. Okay. John?
Thank you guys for including me in this project. So as an archaeologist, you're used to hearing wells and springs, and I automatically think they're full of dirt, that they're closed. And so Tanya Kelly actually called me and said, we found a spring. And I said, great. I said, is there water in it? She said, yeah. And I said, well, I'm not your guide. And honestly, this is a super new and exciting context for me to work in because it's active. because there's still water flowing, which kind of explains some of our findings here. So I can't even fit in the hole, and I'm also extremely claustrophobic. So it was really neat to, I think these guys described it exactly correctly. It's so neat to see people who can be your sort of eyes and ears. And it's really, I mean, I'm here to support their work, and it's incredible, and I'm very inspired. The other cool thing about this project is we got our students involved. So it's spring break at Salve, so there were only a couple of students around, but they had a good time. They were a little cold and wet for a while because we were squirting stuff, but I think overall it was a really neat project. So let me just quickly tell you this kind of services that I guess I provide to the project. One thing that we do at Salve is remote sensing. So we have equipment that actually can analyze the soil or asphalt or the ground surface and actually give us data on what's underneath it. So right off the bat, once the spring was discovered, the idea was they knew there was a pipe heading west, so toward the courthouse. And so I still plan on finishing my work, but I only had a very short window to do this, and it's been really wet and snowy and gross. So I basically could only get in that little area that I think you guys can see, right? A red box. So this is directly over where the well was, and so I set up a little 7x4 meter, I think, grid. Here you see my little pin flags. And so I use ground penetrating radar, which just very quickly, it essentially pulses radar waves into the ground. When those radar waves encounter differences in soil, or in this case voids because of air and things, it reflects back. And what you see here, I have another slide that sort of has a schematic. This is probably more toward 1.5 meters than 2.5. The problem with the depth here is that, again, I'm not used to going over air, and air does really weird things with radar waves. It's used to going through solid soil. So I would again say probably 4 feet or so. So here is the results. So just to orient you, it's upside down in terms of north. So the garage is to the bottom. That would be the bottom of the screen. Spring Street is toward the left, and the courthouse is to the right. And what you're seeing here is basically, when I push the machine, it creates a vertical slice. I use software to stack those slices up, and then I can actually create a top-down map of what I'm seeing. And so the color scheme you see here is reflectivity. So the white stuff is basically hard things. They're things that the radar waves have reflected off of. So my sort of going interpretation now is that that sort of L-shaped big blotchy thing is basically the wall, the stone wall, and perhaps given its sort of relatively large, width, it probably includes, I'm assuming, thinking maybe clay. So they would have excavated a large pit, built the wall, and then backfilled probably with an impervious soil like clay around the outward edges. You can see outlined in blue the sort of interior of the cistern. That thing that's called fill cone is essentially where this disturbance was that Nick was talking about. And then the kind of neat feature that you can sort of make out better before I highlight it is probably that pipe that goes up and then is bent over. There is something that shows up deeper that is maybe the pipe with the basket on it, but it didn't look very good. And I understand these things are like Rorschach tests. You kind of, half of you believe me, the other half don't. But the goal is to get back out there, and really this will make more sense and look nicer once the entire property is done. Looking at the maps, this property has really been impacted, let's say. I mean, in fact, just to the, I guess it'd be the right of this pipe, there was a gas tank in the ground, and I don't know if the folks, when they dug that gas tank, knew where the spring was, or it's just luck, but I mean, they didn't know. Oh my God. Talk about serendipity. I mean, this is literally 3 or 4 feet. And so that's probably where this is cut off, is where when they remediated and removed that gas tank, they probably cut through the pipes that were there. So, wow, that's amazing. See, I didn't know, you learned something new. So I just want to show you, I was sort of guardedly optimistic in terms of dating any deposits that were in the well, or in the cistern, or the spring box, let's use that term. because it is this sort of active, you know, sort of environment, and also in the sort of idea of keeping the water clean, people aren't going to throw stuff out in there, right? Or they're going to muck it out if there's sediments built up. So I'll show you, luckily my area of expertise is sort of late 17th century. Most of my fieldwork's though down in Charleston, South Carolina, but they were all using European ceramics. So this is what, the excavations were very sort of minimal, and so there's still a chance that these things are there, but this is what we'd be looking for. Lots of lead-glazed earthenware, so this is called borderwares, made sort of near Surrey in England, really thick, chunky, greenish, sort of yellow glazed, made in big utilitarian forms like pans. Here's some more lead-glazed earthenwares. This is called North Devon gravel tempered. There's some fancier stuff that's got sgraffito, which is basically incisions that are filled in with slip. But these are very diagnostic, right? There's tin glazed earthenwares. You may have heard the term Delft before, or Majolica or Maiolica, depending on how fancy you want to be. These are all tin glazed earthenwares. Again, very distinctive of the later half of the 17th and even early 18th centuries. There's Staffordshire slipwares. These are more toward the beginning of the 18th century, but again, all of these are very, very distinctive. And then we have our Rhenish stoneware, so Westerwald, you might have heard that term before. These are legit stoneware, so they're not earthenwares, they're fired. Higher temperature, also very beautiful with these applied sprigs and medallion motifs from Germany. And then English brown salt glazed wares, usually in these sort of mug forms. Again, very, very distinctive. And then the pipes. People loved smoking back then. So we find tons and tons in typical 17th century assemblages of pipe stems and also pipe bowls. And the pipe bowls from the late 17th century are very distinct and different from the later 18th century bowls. There's sort of this, they kind of bulb out and then come back in, and sometimes there's a little bit of rouletting, and also the angle of the bowl is sort of distinctive as well. So all of these things, you know, when I go to sleep at night, this is what I was hoping for, you know, when we dumped the things out, and, you know, and this is what we found. So this is actually the worst stuff we found, but you've got, I think a lot of the material in here was probably deposited, unfortunately, when the sort of collapse on the northern wall happened. What we see in this picture is a little bit of soda can there. This is actually at the bottom of the soda can, and then this is sort of spent coal. Like, you know, when you burn coal up, it gets slaggy. That's what a lot of that stuff is. But we found that that's not all we found. Thank God, the kids who gave up their morning would have been very angry at me. We did find evidence of people's diets, right? So this is probably chicken bones, some sort of bird bone that's been burnt. We've got some other sort of burned bones here and here. This is a mussel shell, and then I'll talk about this a little later. This is our highlight artifact. It's our earliest one. It's Creamware, excuse me. We found some building materials, so we've got slate. I would call this sort of, it's almost like flint, or I'd call it chert. It's sort of a dense, might be a ballast stone, but it's been cracked and it's flat. This is probably part of the collapsed wall. It has mortar, and there's some granite sort of, I guess you'd call them thin sort of chinking stones with mortar. We got this kind of double iron strap with rivets going through it. Again, none of this stuff is sort of particularly diagnostic. Certainly it doesn't look 17th century. But in terms of diagnostic, our earliest pottery is this little fragment of creamware. Creamware began to be produced in the 18th century, typically decorated, those little feather shell-edged plates you might have seen with the blue going around the boss. Those are pretty common, hand-painted stuff. This looks to me, again, it's a tiny, tiny fragment, but it looks a little bit more of what we call later creamwares, which date mostly to the first couple of decades of the 19th century. Adriano found, right at the beginning, this really got us psyched, because right when his first descent, he said, oh, I found some ceramics. And he pulled this little piece of whiteware out. It has a pretty diagnostic, even though it's this big, that little frond there is very reminiscent of a very common, the willow motif that you see on tons and tons of it's called transfer print or underglazed printing. And then we found a little bit of red transfer print as well, which is a little bit later into the 19th century. But again, and these are pretty much the diagnostic artifacts that we got. I really, to be honest, I don't think there's going to be tons of early stuff there, but that said, because I've been wrong many times in my life before, the amount of excavation has really been minimal. It's a really tough, I mean, again, I'm not the one down there. We usually stay away from putting textured soils in archaeology because we like to see nice dry profiles. So, you know, as this project moves forward, you know, what happens in there, I mean, we have a lot of talking to do. And in fact, what's interesting, I think what I've learned the most from this project is archaeologists tend to take for granted the function of the feature that we're working in because we're so busy looking at the contents and what's inside of the features, and we just sort of take for granted, well, it used to be, so I dig a lot of Native American pits that were used to roast food and then then they weren't used and they threw trash in it. Or a well was used and then they stopped using it and they threw trash in it. And I'm so concerned with the trash that you never sort of think about what the actual feature was. So working with Nick and Adriana and Michele and Lily and Steve and Howard and everybody, it's really changed the way that I do my job. So even though it's just been a couple of days, I thank you guys. It's been a neat experience. And that's it for me.
So I'm going to just quickly introduce Kevin and Mark. So the great thing that happens when there's activity around a site of importance is curiosity. And I was very surprised when Kevin approached us really right before we were able to even install our confined space tripod to get down there, and mentioned that he had access to some very, very sophisticated equipment that we only dream about. So it was just the most unusual, most bizarre thing. It's almost like my prayers were answered, an angel fell from heaven.
Here he is.
And it didn't take very long, a couple of hours, and Kevin was back with Mark to do work that would take me as someone who is really interested in the draftsmanship of archaeology, the representation of archaeology, to do. This is work to synthesize the space that is actually very difficult to see. You notice from the photographs, it's very, very small. So it's hard to see everything together. And the technology that they're using, which they'll explain about, is able to do that immediately in 2 15-minute scans, 14-minute scans. So you guys can take it away.
So I think as anybody who lives in Newport knows, this town holds a lot of surprises. You may be interested to know that the product marketing department for a 200-year-old Swiss company is actually nestled above Speakeasy. So Mark and I work for a company, and Tobias, who's hiding back there, who's actually a Swiss engineer. Leica Geosystems is the company that we work for. You may have heard of the Leica camera company. That's not us. But similar. So we were a part of the same company about 30 years ago, and then the companies were split, but we still have the brand. As any good Newporter is, I've been very interested in what's going on in the Spring Street project. And my wife, Megan's in the second row, and I lived probably about 100 feet from here. So, and I knew what was going on. I had heard there was some discovery, and so I was walking to work Monday morning, and I saw some activity over there, and I walked past a couple of guys, and I see Nick, and I say, "Hey, are you guys involved in this whole project?" Yeah, we're working on this. I said, "Do you want to 3D scan it?" And when he reacted like that, I was like, "Great, he knows what it is." So I went back to the office and I said to Mark, like, "Hey, we're gonna go scan some stuff today." And so at about 1 o'clock, we went back, and there was the whole team. There was Nick hovering above the hole, yelling down there in Italian, and I was like, "What is going on here?" So what we brought with us is this little guy. So this is a 3D imaging laser scanner. So, so what this does is you place it on a tripod or a table, wherever, and it actually shoots 360-degree spherical imagery with these 3 cameras. It actually shoots thermal imagery as well. So on its first pass. And then on its second pass, this mirror in this chamber here spins and it emits a laser at 360,000 points per second. And what that creates is a 3D model. And so what you're looking at here is actually a colorized point cloud of the actual spring box. So we're actually taking you inside the spring box right now. And I think the guys can talk a little bit about what you're looking at and what you're seeing, and also some of the uses of the technology for the field.
So I think what we're going to do is let's look quickly at where we came down from. So if you just, just look up.
Can we get relative sizes of the, like how far down is it and how wide?
So the width at its widest, at its center line, is a little over 5 feet. So 5'6". One thing that we're getting from measuring the thickness or the depth of the stone itself is that it's about the same. So we're talking about a structure that has stone or stone material that's packed into about 5 feet, and then the widest space is about the same. In terms of the length, we're getting some dimensions from the center line at about 7 foot something, 7'5", and this is what's so great about this is they have it. Like we did some preliminary measurements, and then in the direction of the collapse, we're getting some clear measurements that are about 7 feet. So between 14 and 15 feet wide or long. As far as height is concerned, I do have that written down. I have to go.
Yes, so the think about a point cloud. The point cloud is that the points are actually accurate to about 6 millimeters. So you can take measurements within that point cloud, about 6 millimeter accuracy.
So I apologize for the size of it, but it says that the width at that point is about 5.2 feet. And we go for length from the collapsed area all the way over. And again, these are just free-handed rough. It is about 15.4 feet. There you go.
Now, one thing that's actually interesting about the depth, and I want to see if you might be able to get a measurement from the underside of the ceiling, of one of the ceiling plates, down, is that we also have the problem with water, right? So they're going to capture the water surface, but we had to go and probe further to see if we could test for anything that's solid underneath us. So we did use a probe, which would probably add about 1 foot 4 inches to the depth of the structure, which is something that would reflect back in the data that they're getting.
So, let's go through the distance. About that, directly up. So we have a stone roof there, is that okay?
That's right.
Okay, and once again to go inside, it says about 7.4 feet.
Right. So now add another 1 foot and 4 inches based on just 6 different probes that we took at different locations, so it's an average.
Is that meet code, Michael?
Is that me, Con?
The condo.
The other thing that's really evident in this section here is you can really see the direction of that collapse. All right, so that sloping material that's coming down, and the pipe, that metal pipe is actually acting a little like a dam. It's stopping that material from moving into the other side. And we're very lucky that we found that pipe intact and that it was not pushed over or damaged from whatever collapse this is. I want to see if we can get in closer to the pipe feature.
Pipe feature here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to do it from imagery or?
Let's do it from imagery first.
Okay. So what we're looking at here are the images that were captured on the first time. So whereas when we were flying around, that is the point cloud, so those are all the measurements that have been digitally translated. These are just the photos that were captured by the scanner.
And you can see some of the features that I was mentioning before. So right at the top, the tip of that is that we believe that brass valve, turning valve. Beneath that is a sort of bonnet or an enclosure that we can sort of, if there's a way I can just circle around that, we can see a hinge that allowed the thing to open. Okay, we have that connected down to a pipe piece that's then connected to the left of that, to the longer pipe piece, which leaves the structure. And then, of course, in front, we have a copper filter that looks a little like a colander. Going up, we can see that lead pipe, or what we believe to be is a lead pipe, that is intentionally curved and leads directly to the west of the structure towards the courthouse.
So Nick, so this is where, with the colander, that's where the water entered?
That's
and
right.
Could turn that valve. So what does the window you showed with the ledge?
So what we think, that's a much higher elevation. If we can get to the, there we go. Yeah, I think we'll go to the other center point.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's the dark space, yeah.
That is a bit of a dark space.
Yes, so we might have to...
When we were told we were going to be scanning down there, we did mention the worst things for the scanner are black spaces and shiny spaces. So this was also really what we tried. So first, if we translate.
There we go. So that was certainly built and supported by a lintel as an opening. If you can see that sloping surface, initially we didn't know if that was structure or that was sediment, and it's sediment. When we did the small excavation, which was directly after the scan, so what's nice about the scan, it actually captures the sediment that was there, but we now know that that had a slight slope to it, not an extreme slope. And the theory is that we know that we noticed water trickling down from that location, but it appears that if this was a gallery, it's now clogged, even if there's a small trickle of water. So the dimension that we see in front of the window might continue in the same dimension further back. A hypothesis could be that it is bringing water from another source underneath Spring Street. We wouldn't want this to be exposed on Spring Street. From another location, uphill.
Is it full of water again now? How long does it take it to recover the water?
The recharge. Do you want to talk about that, Eric? Would you like to?
Yeah, it's about 8 hours. They pumped it down to about 7.5 feet, like you saw, and the water was coming in about 5 gallons a minute was my estimate. Afterwards, at that rate, I calculated it would take about 10 hours for it to refill.
Do you have an estimate for when the spring box was built?
I don't. I mean, this is so. Hey, you could call me in a couple months, maybe. So, I mean, there's a lot of research and there's a lot of records to go through. I don't think there's anything yet. We might look at some of the metal work and begin to gain some knowledge about when that sort of work was being done. We could look and see when this type of technology. Well, see, the thing about mortar, you brought up mortar, and we were very lucky to find this piece of mortar. Since it's not it wasn't part of the building structure, we don't know where it came from. Yeah, so it could be debris from something else. We looked for mortar. We were trying to identify areas of mortar. I couldn't find anything in the walls. Couldn't see anything in the walls. But it's very hard to date things immediately. I mean, this is pretty raw data, as you can see. I mean, this is so it's going to take a lot of research and processing to start to look at dates.
Is there any idea, and this is probably too early as well, for how many people this would have provided water? I mean, could this have been one of 100 that would have been all over the island or all over Newport?
Well, what we see in the structure itself, just in the structure itself, is that we see some form of water conveyance that is bringing water into the structure. Okay, so the assumption is that this is a spring, and that it is capturing or holding the spring, but there's also an element that looks like it's conveying water to it. Okay. Second, we know that there are 3 or 4 points where water could be removed. The first is the well itself. Right? We don't know that it could also just be an access point, but we do have historic photos, and I think it's the McKim photo from 1890, 74, okay, that shows the hand pump. We see that hand pump photographed in other sources, I believe, and we also have a monument to that hand pump at Coffey's. Right? There's an image of that. So we know that water was taken from that point. We have this wooden pipe. I called it a cleanout. I don't know if that's the case. It might be another supply line. We have a metal pipe, which we know has a gate valve, which can vary, has variability to it. And then we have this other weird lead pipe that's bent over that looks like it's drawing water from somewhere. So those are the points that I think we at this point would know.
We don't know that all of those things date from the same period.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Any sort of chronology, any sort of what came first, what came after, it's going to take some study.
Is the wood pipe on the upper side?
No, it's roughly parallel to the metal pipe going down towards the direction of the courthouse, towards Washington Square. Okay, so if you want to take this into a larger context, the topography would say that anything that came out from a natural spring would start to move towards, correct me if I'm wrong, Washington Street, the edge of is that right? The northern edge of Washington Square, where it might have united with the river. Yes, but I'm looking like way back in time, and this is where I'm still starting to do some research on this. Is that there was a collect pond off of Broadway in a small.
It was.
Yeah, a small river. So it might have. If you look at the topography, that's what that says. Is the water would move in that direction. The pipes are saying is that the water is moving straight down towards Washington Square, but after a certain distance, we don't know what happens. We don't know where it goes. We don't know if there's another structure. We don't know if the pipe ends somewhere else. We just don't know. So what we have here in this grade model, and some suppositions we can make around spaces around it, like John did with the ground penetrating radar. That's basically what we know.
Right. So in the future, one could put a robot into a pipe and track where it goes.
Well, speaking of robots, maybe Adrian, you want to talk about the investigative robot that Roma Sotteranea has and its dimensions and what it can actually enter into?
It probably could fit in. I really don't know what.
Well, when you mentioned pipe.
Well, you have a wood structure, it'd be nice to know where that goes.
That one is too small. That one is really too small. You can make kind of endoscopic video with a little line. You could try that as well. The other pipe is much bigger, so it could be possible to go with a little robot inside and try to see where it goes. Obviously, if it is empty.
So are there any more questions? Can you get that little device on Amazon yet?
No, we actually, but we're also the e-commerce department. We do sell it. So our companies, we're the manufacturer of the product, and so we, so our department being product marketing, we try to find partnerships like this and just cool stuff to scan. We actually have a partnership with the Newport Opera House that we'll be rolling out pretty soon. We scanned the Opera House as well. So kind of doing a little Washington Square contingent.
You show Washington Square scan?
Yeah. Only for you, 17,000. Yeah, only today. Only today.
Oh, wait, there's more.
So when we went to do the scan, we also took the above ground sections. This was from a series of scans, basically just around the central area. We did one inside, as you can see. There's where we see these silver icons. These are where we took scans from. So you can see the
How
date.
long did it take to investigate?
Each of the scans, we had it on the highest settings because we knew we were going to be down in the dark. So we had HDR photography and we had the highest density. It takes about 4 minutes in that setting, but
Per scan.
per scan.
Yeah.
But you can pull it right down. So if you come in, you can actually see what we're working with.
So fast as Pyrenees did it.
Hey, I don't know.
So as you can see, we can see the facade of everything around here. That these are all the points that were captured by the laser, and they were all pieced together by our software. But essentially, they're all empty. The laser doesn't know there's anything inside, so they're kind of like Hollywood movie sets. And then if you want to see just how busy it was. There you go, that's what we're dealing with most today, just people crowding around the...
So that's a software photographic?
This is the photo. This is where the photo, the 360 photography came in.
Yeah, but the assemblage of the data happens from the point cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and there's a software we work with, Autodesk, and we also have our own software that combines the scans.
But this is from a photograph, or is this on top of the scan?
This is all photographed, but if you watch, I'll transfer this to scan now, and that's the scan. So this is everything the laser can touch, but obviously when we go into the real view, you'll see also the sky and things like that is not captured.
Are there any more questions? Because otherwise we're going to...
In the short term, what's next?
Okay.
It's been a long question.
So, I have to say, based on our findings here, I wish I knew. Just reminds me of the adage, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And so this is a very, very real case of that situation. So it's been fantastic to work with the Historical Society, with the Roma Sotteranea team, with Nick and the Leica team, and I have to say, and also Newport Environmental, who had the wit to stop it, and then Steve Ostagai, who is the executive director of the Church Community and Housing Corporation, who is on our leadership team. He manages the building. Everything that they need, he just somehow miraculously just appears. So he is amazing, and he also helped put the stop on any more work on this well or cistern, as we found out it was, until we could really do a study. The foundations, the 1772 foundation was very generous, gave us a $40,000 grant to help us, and then individuals helped us as well to raise the money to do this interim study, which, as you can see, is really, I just think, been incredible because, as Ruth explained, the history just keeps bubbling up in Newport, and you really can't ignore it, nor do you want to ignore it. You want to embrace it and really find out as much as you possibly can. So that's what we're doing. Our plan was, and still is, I just might be adjusting to answer your question, might be adjusting our timeline a bit, is to, with our design team, L+A, landscape architects, and Tanya Kelly is here representing them today, they will help us decide how to treat this very important water feature and interpret it for the public. But the overall site is going to be made into a park, and it will be given to the public. It's going to be preserved as open space. We will have a water feature. We just don't know exactly how, because as I learned from the experts here, if you shine light into a place that's been covered up, then suddenly you get flora and fauna growing and all sorts of things. So that's been a relatively enclosed space and relatively, I won't say not contaminated, but relatively uncontaminated. That might be why we're not finding a lot of, broken things, because it was never, as you can see, it still exists. So it was never used as a trash pit. At least that's what we think. But as Ruth always reminds us, Lily, we don't know. So we're going to work with it as much as we can, respect it. We'll certainly use it as a water feature, whether we can figure out how to show the people, let them see it, and maybe through images such as the Leica images that you see here. We just don't know yet, but we do hope to get our design. When do you think?
Oh boy.
Oh boy. That's what we're always asking. But soon.
Some brainstorming. All
Yeah, a lot more brainstorming, and so maybe I keep saying early summer. And then we will bring that to the public the moment we have a design concept that's really that you can look at and give comments on. So then we will present that to the public so that you can comment on it and say, well, I don't like this, I like that, and because it really is going to be for the city of Newport, it's for you, and we want you to be able to enjoy it as much as you possibly can. And so it's going to take a little while, but we hope Steve, before he gives up on us, to finish the construction in the first half of 2019. Don't forget, we have to raise the money. We have raised a lot of money. We've purchased the building. We've done the environmental remediation. We have this interim period, and now once we have the design, we will finish the project. So I have to thank all of you, certainly everybody here, but all of you for just being so interested in this feature, and I really, really appreciate it. And we that you can always visit. And I also want to thank the Historical Society, and Ms. Taylor in particular, for helping us with this particular period. And also, she assures me that she's going to have an intern working all summer on water features in Newport. Is that true? Yeah, so there's a lot more to learn. So it's going to be the Newport Historical Society is a tremendous resource, as we all know. Thank you.